Universitas Airlangga grows together in synergy with other top Indonesian universities to create a positive academic environment in its campuses. Universitas Airlangga is situated near to the public facilities such as sports centers, shopping centers, hospitals, police stations, and other public places which greatly support the educational process. The main campuses are located near to the city center of Surabaya, the vibrant city that also allows Universitas Airlangga to pay attention on its greenery. It is shown by an extensive concern on public parks and cleanliness. It creates a comfortable and refreshing atmosphere for the students during their studies. Despite living in modern and advanced city, students of Universitas Airlangga always uphold humanistic values and live in harmony in the surrounding communities. The students also make positive contribution to the communities. For its contribution to the world, Universitas Airlangga continues to make efforts and take a more significant role in global civilization's development. These are conducted through collaborative researches, international partnership, teaching session, and various community services. All of these efforts are derived from the spirit and the values from Universitas Airlangga motto, excellence with morality. It acts as the foundation for every element of the academic community in Universitas Airlangga to achieve the just and civilized global society.
Welcome, everyone. We would like to start the agenda in a minute. Please remain online and kindly switch your microphone to silent mode. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Postgraduate School Airlangga University, Surabaya, Indonesia. The Honorable Guest, His Excellency Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, Profesor Bambang Sektiari Lukiswanto, Dr. Saule Kemal Bayeva, Profesor Badri Munir Sukoco, Vice Directors and the Program Coordinator of Postgraduate School Universitas Airlangga, and the distinguished instructors, and hello to all the participants coming from Kazakhstan, Philippines, India, Georgia, Nigeria, Germany, Italy, Spain, China, and many more. Thank you and welcome to the second online summer school on comparative regionalism, the future of regionalism after COVID-19 pandemic 2022. Organized by Postgraduate School Universitas Airlangga in collaboration with United Nations University Institute Comparative Regional Integration Studies, Belgium, and the International School of Economics of Narikbaevka School, University, Kazakhstan. My name is Shafira, and I will be the master of ceremony for the next 5 days. Now we will listen to the Indonesian anthem and hymn Airlangga. On this occasion, I would like to give a floor to our grandly guest, His Excellency Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, the Ambassador of Indonesia in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan, to give the welcoming speech. His Excellency Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, salam, selamat siang Indonesia. Director of Postgraduate School of Airlangga University, Professor Badri Munir Sukocho, Dean of International School of Narik Bayeb Kazgu University, Dr. Saule Kemal Bayeva, Director of United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, Mr. Philippe de Lombardi. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to be invited in this academic forum that attended by the speaker who has expertise in international studies. I am the expert of Indonesian political communication and also study international political communication. However, previously as a spokesperson of Indonesian President, Mr. Joko Widodo, and now as newly appointed Ambassador of Indonesia to Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, I learned more about the international issues, especially that closely related with Indonesian interests. Ladies and gentlemen, regionalism are mostly interrelated. Regional framework across the globe has interact to each other and shares the known ideas and interests between them. It is involved both state and non-state actors across innumerable policy on variety of institutional designs and forms. Comparative regionalism invite us to view the issues on regionalism using multidisciplinary approach to help us understand the global issues. One of the global issues that become the attention and happens worldwide is pandemic of COVID-19 as the global changers. On some countries, up to now, it is still become the reason to implement strict quarantine procedures. However, with vaccination and by the time people has learned how to handle this disease, mostly countries in the world has coming to terms with COVID-19 and open their borders. Indonesia also has gradually opened our international entry point. Moreover, with the newest health protocol for international travelers to Indonesia, the travelers who enter Indonesia would not require to do PCR test on the airport in Indonesia. Kazakhstan, in my personal opinion, has already entered academic phase of COVID-19. Since here, we are not obligated to wear mask outside or inside the building, except in health facilities or showing our vaccination certificate when entering public facilities. Ladies and gentlemen, the policy of handling post-COVID-19 in countries that sometimes in different phases will impact also how the countries address the challenges on social economy, political, and geopolitics. In the broad view, it will also impact the countries interact in the regional cooperation. Moreover, post-pandemic COVID-19 will also meet the challenge of climate change, economic disruption after pandemic, lack of education, poverty, and more recently the attack and the war in Ukraine and Russia. Study of comparative regionalism in this context become more important so it can respond to multidimensional issue using appropriate perspective. To sum up my speech, I hope all the participants will have fruitful lessons and discussion on this online summer school, and hopefully in the future this kind of summer school will not only held online but will be on offline format. So it will enrich the experience of the participant. Thank you very much. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, His Excellency Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, for the pleasing greetings. Now, I would like to invite the second honorable guest, Vice Rector for Academic Students and Alumni Universitas Airlangga, Professor Bambang Satyari Lukiswanto. You may have the floor.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessing of Allah be upon you, His Excellency H.E. Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, Ambassador of Indonesia in Nur Sultan, Kazakhstan, Honorable Professor Shaule Kamal Bayev, Dean of International School of M. Bayev, Kasgu University, Honorable Professor Dr. Badri Munir Skoco, Director of Postgraduate School, Universitas Airlangga, Honorable Prof. Philip de Lamberde, Director of United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, UNOCRIS, Honorable Lecturer, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to join you, and on behalf of Rector Universitas Airlangga, Professor Muhammad Nasir, allow me to give a very warm greeting for all of you and welcome in the second online summer organized by Postgraduate School Universitas Airlangga. Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah, the Almighty, for giving us the opportunity to gather here at second online summer school on comparative regionalism, the future of regionalism after COVID-19 pandemic in good health. I would like to extend my gratitude to the Universitas Airlangga Postgraduate School for organizing this event. May this collaborative event with United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies and International School of Economic of M. Bayev, Kasgu University run well and achieve all its objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a transformation triggering a discussion on global future and world order. Furthermore, the pandemic has amplified global socio-economic, political, and geopolitical conditions. And when we are recovering from pandemic, issues are arising on state and regional organization role, acceleration of geopolitical recovery, and the future of regionalism after COVID-19. The second online summer school on comparative regionalism has gathered regional and international intellectuals with different backgrounds to discuss the future of regionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, we really appreciate the topic chosen for this event, the future of regionalism after COVID-19 pandemic. For comparative regionalism academic, post-pandemic world order would be very interesting to discuss. Furthermore, this opportunity can be used to address the local and regional role in dealing with challenges in socio-economic, politics, and geopolitics. May this session bring forward the ideas, thoughts, and solutions that can be proposed to re-stabilize the region, especially to maintain economic, political, and other sector stabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I really appreciate the collaboration between Universitas Airlangga Postgraduate School, United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, UNUCRIS, and International School of Economic of M. Bayev, Kasgu University. May this discussion from many international experts and scientists lead to significant impact to the regional and global world order after the pandemic. And finally, have a great conference, and hopefully our participation in this event can be our contribution to the community, and may all of us always have the blessing of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Bambang Sektiari, for the warm speech. Next, I would like to please Dr. Saule Kemal Bayeva as the Dean of International School of M. Narik Bayev Kazgu University to deliver welcoming words. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Saule.
Good day, thank you very much. On behalf of the management and faculty of the Narik Bayev Kazgu University, Kazakhstan, and the International School of Economics, that is the part of the university, I'm honored and pleased to welcome the participants of the second online summer school on comparative regionalism this year, conducted on the topic, the future of regionalism after COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, there was a very successful launch of this project with the esteemed colleagues from our partner universities, attended by more than 60 participants from 23 countries around the globe. And I'm happy that this successful initiative turned into a regular project. I hope that we will jointly host this summer school every year since now. As the previous speakers have already noted, indeed, the topic is really very relevant and interesting. COVID-19 pandemic changed many things in our lives, politics, economies, and societies. And moreover, it induced even more changes, some of which we still witness. And in this challenging time, it is really very important to promote public academic discussions in the international arena and involve emerging and future research from them. And that is exactly what the summer school does. And again, our school is really very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this initiative and be part of this community of international academics. I wish the participants 5 intensive and exciting days full of new knowledge, interesting discussion, networking, of course. And I thank the colleagues from our partner institutions for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Such a warm greetings for us. And the next one, please join me in welcoming the Director of Postgraduate School Universitas Airlangga, Professor Badri Munir Sukocho. Professor Badri, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Mbak Safira. The Honorable Excellency, Dr. Muhammad Fajrul Rahman, the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, as the keynote speaker. Thank you for your support, Bapak Ambassador, distinguished speakers, Professor Dr. Bambang Sektiari Luiswanto, Professor Rector from Universitas Airlangga, and also Dr. Saule Kemal Bayeva, the Dean of Narik Bayev Kazgu University, and also Professor Philippe de Lambarde from UNUCRIS, Belgium, Professor Song Nile from Tongji University, the instructors, Dr. Jan Orbi, Dr. Marek Neumann from Groningen, and also Dr. Alessandro Russo from Trento, and also Dr. Henny Saptatia, Dr. Pierre Cabal from Le Havre, and also Dr. Rahmat Pramono, our former ambassador in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, and also Dr. Amandine Grangoenon from European Council of Foreign Relations, Dr. Filippo Costa Brunellelli, and also Dr. Rosa Ristawati, and Dr. Radian Salman, and of course, our Vice Directors, Head of Study Program, and the beloved Summer School of Participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon, everyone. The online summer school on comparative regionalism in changing world order 2022 is the second summer school, presenting global experts discussing a specific topic, regionalism. The objective is to expose participants to the field of research on comparative regionalism in global arena in the context of emerging powers and shifting political and economic balances. Today's event is the sequential event that we conduct and get support from the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. And Mr. Ambassador, the Honorable Excellency Dr. Fajrul Rahman, it is also our 12th event to implement our Memorandum of Understanding between Universitas Erlangga and the Kasgu University of Kazakhstan. We wish our summer school students can understand the logic of regionalism. Current debates caused, among others, by erosion of liberal international order, are bringing into fore the importance of regionalism projects. Regionalism is at the center of scholarly and policy debate for many different reasons, and the logic of regionalism in post-COVID-19 global order necessitates an in-depth comparative approach, which sees regionalism as a lasting feature of world order. By understanding that, then we can follow up by realizing the potential of Greater Asia as the next economic locomotive growth, as well as each country for the betterment of society, not only for economy, but also social, political, and laws. Similar logic can also be applied to Africa, Europe, North and South Africa, America, and Australia. Last but not least, this is another stepping stone for our collaboration with Higher School of Economics of M. Narikbayev Kasgu University, Kazakhstan, United Nations Universities Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, UNICRIS from Belgium, and also Prof. Bambang, our Vice Rector. We also will conduct the offline summer school in the mid of June in Bali, with more 100 registered participants, and we select 75 participants from 70 countries to participate in this online summer school, while for offline, I think more than 70 countries too. And with the support of the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, we can create future events such as winter school with multidisciplinary issues about ASEAN and European Union or other regional institutions, particularly the world order post-COVID-19. So please give big applause to all honorable speakers, instructors, conveners, as well as all of the participants, particularly to our International Partnership Unit and also Vice Director of Postgraduate School who make this event happen successfully. And thank you, and have a wonderful, enjoyable, and insightful summer school in the next 5 days. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for the remarkable speech, Professor Badri. Before we get to hear an opening lecture, please turn on the camera. We will take a photo session. The committee, please count.
Okay, ready, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Once again. 1, 2, 3, and the last. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, after some
Thank you, Prof. Bambang.
we will enjoy a few minutes to watch a video. That was a welcome traditional dance from Indonesia. And now I would like to remind the rules conducted in this online summer school. First, participant has to involve actively in every session in 5 days of summer school. There will be short paper assignment and group assignment, which have to be completed to get the certificate. There will be absent attendance twice in a day. And then please rename your Zoom ID with the name and country. Use the ID card on your Zoom profile. Turn on camera and use the virtual background during the event, and keep yourself muted unless speaking. Okay, now, as we are about to enter in the main session, let me introduce our moderator, who will be managing the next welcoming speech and the first opening lecture, which will be delivered by Dr. Philip de Lambordi, the Director of United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies. To our moderator, Mr. Enrico Silangen, you are pleased to take over.
Thank you, Vera, for your introduction. To begin our summer school lectures series for today and the next 4 days, I would like to invite Dr. Philip de Lombardi, Director at Interim of United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, Belgium, to deliver his welcoming speech and continue with his opening lecture. To Dr. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Enrico. We are very glad to be part again of the second edition of this summer school. So, honorable guests, dear colleagues, and dear participants, I would like to welcome you also on behalf of UNIQUIS to this second edition of this summer school. I would like to congratulate our partner universities, Universitas Airlangga and Narikbayev Kazgu University, for taking this initiative, and to the organizing team to come up again with a very interesting program. As you have seen, the program that is waiting for you is quite rich and covers a number of, let's say, many aspects and facets of this phenomenon that we call regionalism in the world. I have a PowerPoint that I would like to share with you. Let me try to share my screen. 1 second. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see now.
People are nodding. Okay, thank you very much. So, and I also thank, obviously, the organizing team for inviting me to not only welcoming you, but also to present this keynote speech, which will, let's say, introduce the topic, the general topic, to you, which will then be further developed in more specific lectures, and which also will allow you to discuss these topics the next coming days. Let me perhaps, first of all, just say a few words about our institute, United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies. This institute is, as the name already suggests, is part of United Nations University, and United Nations University is part of the United Nations system. So we are part of this family of agencies that together form the United Nations system. United Nations University is a bit of a specific member of that family. It is an academic institution which was created as a think tank for the UN system. We are a think tank for the system, providing inputs to the system in terms of knowledge, insights, and so on. At the same time, we are created as a bridge between the United Nations system and the academic world, the world of the universities. The idea is to interact and allow knowledge to flow in both directions, but especially to translate knowledge that is being created in the academic world into usable knowledge for the UN system and its member states. So what, well, our name refers to the university, although we are not, let's say, operating as a classical university. Most of our activities are research related, that is related to this function as a think tank, as I just explained. Now, in addition, there are some institutes within United Nations University that do engage in postgraduate education, and we are, of course, involved also in short-term trainings like the one we are participating in today. One of the institutes of United Nations University is the Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, and as you can already see, the United Nations University is not organized like, let's say, a traditional university in terms of faculties, disciplines, departments. It is rather organized by issue areas, you could say, or policy areas, problem areas, if you wish. And each of these institutes is typically interdisciplinary in nature. So we bring together academics, students, and researchers coming from different disciplines to work on a number of topics, broader topics, which we then approach from different angles. In our case, and our mandate is to study the role of regions in governance and in policy making. We are specifically interested in what the value added is of regions, and regions originally in the sense of supranational regions, the level where countries come together, cooperate, and sometimes decide to create institutions of a supranational nature, and how that regional level interacts with the global level on the one hand, and then the national level on the other hand. Now, over time, and UNUCRIS was created 20 years ago, over time we have also become interested in these vertical interactions between these supranational regions and the other levels of governance, including the subnational regions. As you know, the word region has more than one meaning. We use the word to refer to the supranational level, but we also refer, and that is probably even commonly used, we also refer to regions at the subnational level, as you know. So we have become interested also in how these different levels interact, and in that context we often talk about multi-level governance. We are also interested in looking at how regions speak to other regions and how they interact with other regions, and how ASEAN is negotiating with the European Union, for example. These horizontal interactions we call interregionalism. So both the vertical and the horizontal interactions are on our radar. Our mandate is global. We are indeed, as already mentioned, based in Belgium, but our mandate is global, and we are open to collaboration with partners around the world, like in this case of the summer school. We are open to receive visiting research fellows. We are open to receive students who want to are looking for internships and so on. So don't hesitate to contact us and to visit our website if you are interested in our activities. So far, the promotional 5 minutes. Let me then move on to my introductory lecture, which, as I already mentioned, has the aim to introduce basically the topic of this week. I know that some of you are already familiar with the topics, have already read about it, or are studying it, or are doing research about it. Other participants are perhaps less familiar with the topic. So let me start with some of the basics, which we then can take further in the next sessions. Now, when you describe an area of research, in this case, comparative regionalism, there is always this question, okay, what is in and what is out, what is covered by that area and what is not. Very often also research areas obviously also overlap with other research areas and research programs. So the first question is, okay, what is on the radar? And I hinted already a bit this before. When we say comparative regionalism, we are usually referring to that supranational or international level of cooperation, interaction, integration sometimes. This is about regional organizations like ASEAN, Mercosur, the European Union, ECOWAS, and so on. It is about regional organizations. It is not necessarily only about regional organizations. It is also about other arrangements that also have this regional dimension, this regional scope, this cross-border dimension, but not necessarily leading to the creation of institutions and with a secretariat and a treaty. There are different kinds of collaboration, cooperation possible. Of course, there it is up to the researcher basically then to see, okay, what is on the radar, what is not. And there is always a gray zone there, which has to be defined by the researcher at the end of the day. Comparative regionalism is also about how regions emerge, are created, are taking shape independently of the policies and the political projects. Regions are also organic in a way. Regions are also characterized by common features. For example, a common language, a common culture, sometimes a common religion, or simply because of geographical proximity. So there are different ways to look at regions. Nowadays, we sometimes distinguish between regionalism, which is then referring to the political project, the projects proposed by political leadership, which are heard in their discourses, which then sometimes crystallize into treaties or institutions that are set up, regionalism. But on the other hand, we refer to regionalization as the de facto process leading to regions becoming regions, and based on the factors I just mentioned. Now, regionalism is also a contested phenomenon. As it is a political project, it has, in history known its ups and downs. If we consider that, let's say, the modern history of regionalism starts after the Second World War, in its, let's say, modern varieties, we have seen these ups and downs. We have seen periods where not only political leadership, but I would say the public more in general was very hopeful and with respect to regionalism, where regionalism was seen as something that could help solving concrete problems, sometimes something that was needed to complement national policy making and national institutions. But we also have had periods where there was either very little interest in it, like in the 1980s, but also periods where there was a lot of, or has been a lot of skepticism. And recently, over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, we have seen this skepticism emerging in different parts of the world. Close, I mean, where we are operating in Belgium, we have seen Brexit happening, a country deciding to leave the European Union. But we have also seen NAFTA and the building of a wall between two members of NAFTA, and also critical questionings of regionalism projects in other parts of the world. We've seen a sort of return of nationalisms in many countries. You see political parties, political movements moving away from these regional projects and looking more inwardly and proposing, let's say, certain forms of protectionism, new forms of protectionism, and so on. Now, if we look at the very recent history of the last couple of years, we have gone through challenging times all over the world, and it was also mentioned already in the welcoming words of some of our honorable guests. We are going through challenging times. There was, of course, or there is the COVID pandemic, which had very drastic impact. We have seen conflicts, and we see conflicts happening as we speak. We have seen and we see flows of refugees in different parts of the world. Now, when you think of policy responses to these challenges, and when you look at the policy responses that have been designed to tackle these challenges, you see that the national level is clearly insufficient, incapable of formulating the right responses. If you take the simple example of the COVID pandemic, it's very clear that an adequate and an effective response requires action at different levels of policy making, from the global to the regional, the national, the subnational, and the local. You need action at all these levels. It's not about which level should act. No, it's about how should action be organized at these different levels, and how can action, public policies, how can they be coordinated so that the package of action and resources that are mobilized, how they can be mobilized in the most effective way. If you think of COVID, it was about how to coordinate, for example, lockdowns, how to coordinate restrictions on mobility, especially in border regions. It was about the joint procurement of vaccines, and so on. So it's very clear, and I think the public in general has also understood this. The same with these massive flows of refugees. Individual countries, and especially smaller and medium-sized countries, are not able to cope with some of these challenges. So I think there is an understanding also that we also need this regional level, for these forms of regional cooperation. Now, this can happen in different formats. That does not mean that you have to adhere to a specific template of collaboration or institutions that should be created at the regional level. No, diversity is possible, but you need action at that regional level. So we have moved from, let's say, a period of a lot of skepticism vis-à-vis international cooperation in general, and then more specifically at the regional level, to, I think, I hope, an understanding that we also need these forms of regional cooperation. What I would like to do in my intervention is to basically refer to three questions that come up when we talk about regional cooperation and integration. The why question, the where question, and then the so what question. Now, the why question, in fact, is what occupies us as academics, as researchers in this area. We have developed theories to look into this. We have gathered data. But the why question refers, in fact, to at least two different questions. There is a why question in the sense of why is this happening? Why are regions being created? Why are regional organizations being created? The why question also refers to another question, which is, why do we need regionalism? Why should there be regional policies? So the why question turns out to refer to two different questions. An important element in addition is that in order to understand what is happening within regions, and in order to formulate also recommendations about what should happen within regions, it is also important to understand that the region obviously is not an island. The region is connected to the rest of the world, and depending on the region you're looking at, external factors also play a role. And in order to understand what is happening within regions, it is important to understand the weight and the importance of these external factors. If you look at the history of ASEAN, for example, but also the history of the European Union, the history of Comecon, and it is very clear that it is impossible to understand that history and the emergence of these, or the creation of these integration schemes, without understanding the context of the Cold War. What we also see is that countries, but also certain regions, have external policies and interact with other regions and try to influence what is happening in other regions. This influence is either political, sometimes supported by resources, regions assisting other regions by sending resources to strengthen the secretariat or to design and implement certain policies. So these things are also happening. We should not forget about it. Now, when looking at the regions from the inside, the why question is addressed at least two levels. There is, let's say, the political level, and then the more academic discussion on regionalism. At the political level, you have political leadership, political movements who might or might not include, let's say, regional policies into their manifestos and their programs. Now, these manifestos or these programs, they are based on, obviously, or can be based on different kinds of motivations. It can be about ideology, identity. It can be about economic interests. It can be about strategic considerations, or a combination of all this. That depends. That has to be looked at from on a case-by-case basis. But what is clear is that you have had, and we see the importance of political leadership, and in, let's say, in coming up with projects, political projects at the regional level. Now, on the other hand, you have the academic discussion, which is then more refined in terms of conceptual frameworks, and then builds theories. In this respect, we distinguish sometimes between what we call positive and normative theories. And the positive theories referring to explaining regionalism, the normative theory rather prescribing what should we do, what is an optimal policy, and so on. Now, in between this academic discussion and the more political discussion, you have the role of the technocrats, which should not be underestimated, because in any case, and in many cases, that regional level is a relatively, I mean, from a political perspective, a relatively light level, which is very often driven by an intergovernmental logic. And if institutions are created, they are mostly purely intergovernmental, which means that they are not necessarily the environment of, let's say, regional politics. Politics is usually happening at the national level, and the actors active at the regional level are basically delegated from that national level. And that makes that technocrats are also playing an important role in designing policies and implementing policies, then responding rather to their, let's say, national counterparts, rather than responding to a regional electorate, which usually does not exist. So we should not underestimate that element also. Now, as with any political project, there is not necessarily a consensus on the end goal. Now, sometimes it's not so difficult to find a consensus if it is based on, let's say, technical considerations. For example, if there is a need to build a bridge between two countries, to connect the economies of two countries across a river, that is not so difficult to find a consensus on, for example, this kind of large infrastructural works. Or if you are in the middle of a COVID crisis, and you have two densely populated cities on two sides of the border, it's not so difficult to find some kind of consensus on the need to regulate, for example, mobility between these two cities, because of the urgency of these measures. So there, it's not so much about ideology, it's more about urgency and about finding technical solutions to concrete problems. But of course, if you look at, let's say, medium-term policies or longer-term policies, there is, of course, this aspect of finding a consensus, or whether there is a consensus at all. For example, when we talk about trade, there during quite some time, especially in the 90s, end of the 80s, 1990s, there was practically a consensus on the advantages of free trade, both at the regional and the global level. So there was this, let's say, dominating paradigm of free trade, which is no longer there. Free trade is being questioned for a number of reasons. There are the environmental considerations, the environmental impact of trade, but also of producing in different places. There is also the new strategic thinking about strategic autonomy, reducing dependence on trade flows of certain inputs and so on. So this is under discussion now. Another very good example is migration. There is obviously no consensus at all about the end goal of migration policies or migration governance. Is it about liberalizing these flows, making migration easier, making the lives of migrants easier and giving them access to social security and all this? Or is it about stopping these flows of migrants? And so there are a number of policy areas where you don't have this consensus. And if there is no consensus, it's very difficult then to come up with a political project in one or another direction. So when you look at these different policy areas, you see that in some areas there has been made more progress than in others. And that depends on the particularities of each of these areas and the degree of consensus that can be built around it at the regional level. Now, the second question is, okay, if there are good reasons, to collaborate, and there are good reasons, we have normative theories, for example, especially in the area of economics, that demonstrate why we should liberalize trade regionally, why we should build, in some cases, a monetary union and so on. So we also have good arguments to build, let's say, areas of peace by integrating and avoiding conflict. So if we have these good reasons, where has regional cooperation or integration actually taken off? Now, if you look at the world around us and you try to see where it is happening or has happened, the first thing you see is that the modalities are very heterogeneous. This is very different from what is happening at the national level. At the national level, you have some kind of standardization of institutions. So you have, in all countries in the world, you have a government and a parliament and the ministries, and you have the courts, and you find this basic structure replicated in all countries. And then you have ministries with specific responsibilities in different areas, implementing policies and so on. If you look at the regional level, and the supranational regional level, you don't have this. First of all, there are countries that are not part of a regional organization. All countries are part of some kind of regional arrangement or have some kind of regional agreements in place or regional treaties, but not necessarily part of these regional organizations with institutions and a secretariat and treaty-based, not necessarily. But even the ones that are part of it, also there you see quite some heterogeneity. Differences in depth, differences in format, in modalities, and so on. Some of the collaboration that you see at the regional level is very specific, and the arrangement is what we call task specific. For example, you can collaborate with your neighbors that share with you a river. The riparian countries around the river can agree on how to govern that river in terms of pollution, in terms of building hydroelectric dams and so on. So you can agree on collaboration on a very specific topic. On the other extreme, you have what we call general purpose organizations like ASEAN, the European Union, Mercosur, that kind of organizations that have more solid institutions and that have a broad agenda, that have a broad mandate and a broad or a relatively broad agenda. Part of what we see is formal, is based on formal agreements supported by formal institutions, formal rules, but part of what we see happening at the regional level is informal. And that does not mean that it is less important. You have indeed countries informally collaborating with their neighbors through diplomatic channels, through other channels. You also have the subnational authorities in border regions, for example, informally interacting with their counterparts on the other side of the border. So all this is relevant. So if you engage in a sort of mapping exercise of regional cooperation and integration, you have to consider all this, unless, of course, you have very specific research question, and then you focus on a subset of these expressions of regionalism. There are a number of data sources that you can consult as a student, as a researcher. There are a few databases that are specifically focusing on regional organizations. RIX is our own data platform, the Region Integration Knowledge System at UNICRIS. There are others like the CROP initiative. I will come back to this in a minute. You also have the Yearbook of International Organizations, with which you might be familiar. And there are other sources, the WTO, of course, and then also other databases and platforms where you can find, let's say, an overview of organizations, treaties, and so on. These are a few examples of these places. So if you are doing research in this area, I would certainly encourage you to visit these websites where you can find a lot of information about regionalism. So, as I already mentioned, when we talk about regionalism, we very often focus on the regional organizations, the general purpose regional organizations. You see a few examples there, ASEAN, the Andean Community, the Gulf Cooperation Council, for example, ECOWAS in West Africa, European Union, and so on. So very often we look into these. But I repeat, this is only, let's say, one modality of regional cooperation. Now, how many of these organizations are there? Well, in the CROP project, which is a project based at the University of Göttingen in Germany, so what they did there was to collect information on let's say, treaty texts by which these organizations are created. And what they consider as organizations are organizations of at least 3 countries, so no bilateral collaboration, but let's say regional, where there is a secretariat that is built, and organizations that have access to resources provided by the member states. They count between 70 plus organizations nowadays, and you see very clearly that since, let's say, the Second World War, you have an almost linear increase in the number of these organizations, which stabilizes basically in the 2000s. So around 2000, you see the stabilization of that number. Now, is that the exact number? Well, that depends a bit on how you filter them. In our own database, the RICS database, we have a few more, but let's say that we are talking about around 80 or 90 region organizations probably in the world, active in the world today, organizations in that sense. 3 members, the secretariat, the treaty, resources, and all this, that package. Now, the interesting thing in this CROP project was that they codified these treaties to see in which areas these organizations are active. Now, obviously, the organizations are present all over the world, in some places more than in other places. Typically, there is less density of these organizations in Asia, both Asia Pacific, Eurasia. Typically, they are more dense in the Americas and then, let's say, Europe. But when you look at then what they are actually doing, according to the treaty texts, you see that indeed they cover a number of areas. And you see also some variation over time. Typically, if you look at the organizations that were created after the Second World War, meaning the 1950s, 60s, and then early 70s, typically the organizations were either focused towards, let's say, the economy, trade and the economy, or to security issues. Yeah? So typically you had security organizations on the one hand, and then trade organizations, economic integration organizations on the other hand. Now what you see, so typically the references to trade or security were quite important. Now, most of the treaties also have an additional element that refer to what binds these countries, and then culture is mentioned, and social welfare. You typically see this in many treaties, even if that does not necessarily lead to very concrete policies. Concrete policies you see indeed in trade and in security. There are topics that have become more important over time. Health, for example, is nowadays more important than it has been before. Now, as you see there, almost in 50% of the cases, there is a reference to health also. But more spectacular, for example, the environment. In the 1970s, only 13.8, let's say 14% of the treaties refer to the environment. Nowadays, more than 75% of the treaties refer to the environment. The same with human rights. Human rights was also practically absent in the 1970s, and now almost 60% of the treaties refer to human rights. So you see, there is this is dynamic also. These general purpose regional organizations have shown a sort of broadening of their agenda over time. These are other statistics that come from the same database. I won't go into the details, but as you see there, in some cases, and the European Union and ASEAN are examples of this. You have on top a group of general purpose organizations that have more than average collaboration or references in their treaty texts, both in the economic sphere and in the conflict prevention sphere. Others typically underperform in both aspects, like in the case of SARC or the Arab Maghreb Union, for example. But this codification of treaties allows you to look at these things more in detail and not just register whether there is a treaty or not, whether there is an organization or not, but allows you, when you look at the details, allows you to look more into detail about, okay, what is this about? And it allows you to differentiate also between regional organizations. I think that is the same, but by regions. I think I will skip this one. Another source of information is this Yearbook of International Organizations, where they start from a very broad database of international organizations. They count 75,000, but that does not only include intergovernmental organizations, obviously, but also private organizations of all types. So they start with a very, very broad population, but it includes obviously then a subset of what we call regional organizations. So this is another source of information. Now, an area where you do find, let's say, sort of standardized register of and standardized modalities is the area of trade. This is WTO data. There is a very good database organized by the WTO on trade agreements and on regional trade agreements. And this has to do with the fact, obviously, that regional collaboration in trade is regulated. In other areas, collaboration is not regulated. And there is no entity, no multilateral entity that regulates. Countries can collaborate in culture, in health, in migration, or in other areas with their neighbors, and they can simply choose. They are completely autonomous in choosing the modality. Anything is possible. So that is why you have all this heterogeneity, these differences. But in the area of trade, you find standardization. You find templates. When WTO members want to engage in regional collaboration, they have to opt for the creation of a free trade area or the creation of a customs union. They have to go for one of these two modalities. And so the modalities are regulated, are standardized, and at the same time, they are monitored. So it means that we have very good statistics on collaboration in that area. This is taken from the WTO website. What you see there, for example, are these notifications of regional trade agreements. Now, an important remark in this context is that an important remark in this context is that when the WTO refers to regional trade agreements, that they do not necessarily refer to agreements among neighboring countries. Regional for the WTO has a different meaning. Regional means anything which is not multilateral. So any agreement that only involves a subset of WTO members is called regional by them. So you have to be careful there. For example, a trade agreement between the United States of America and Israel or Jordan, which actually exists, is a bilateral agreement, but it is called regional also by the WTO. So if you look at these things, you should keep that in mind. The graph you see here includes the ones that are in force and inactive. But what you see very clearly there are the so-called two waves of regionalism that we have seen in the past. There is a first wave starting in the 60s and then 70s, which was a period indeed of increasing interest in signing regional trade agreements. And then you have this second wave, which is much more pronounced in the 1990s, which is, let's say, the period of globalization also, but which led to the signing of many trade agreements then. And that continues until the early 2000s and then goes down. Now there is one peak, it's perhaps clearer here, perhaps clearer here, and there was one peak in 2021, but that is, let's say, a very exceptional peak, which has everything to do with Brexit. The peak you see there in 2021 is basically Brexit. Before Brexit, the UK was part of the European Union and was also part of all the trade agreements of the European Union. With Brexit, the UK signed new agreements to replace the previous ones with all these trade partners of the European Union. So that is why you have this peak. We will see in the coming years that the trend will simply continue and we move in the direction of a stabilization of the number of RTAs signed. This is where most of the RTAs are signed. So the dark red color indicates countries that are very active in signing these RTAs. You also have these, let's say, the disaggregation by regions. And you see that indeed Europe, but also East Asia and South America have been quite active in signing RTAs. Now, these figures are a bit difficult to compare because the number of countries per region obviously varies. The WTO also distinguishes between cross-regional and intra-regional. So more than half of the total number of RTAs are considered cross-regional, and the rest is then intra-regional. Again, one has to be a bit careful in interpreting this. It very much depends on how the regions are defined by the WTO. You see there, for example, that in the Caribbean, that there are apparently no RTAs, while something like CARICOM exists in the Caribbean. Why is that? Because CARICOM has two members that are on the South American continent, I mean, geographically speaking. So the WTO considers those as cross-regional rather than intra-regional. So you have to be careful with this. But all these data are available. Now, as I mentioned before, there is another modality to collaborate or to cooperate regionally within the WTO, which is the creation of customs unions. And so this is the list of customs unions, which is much shorter than the list of RTAs, the free trade areas that are built. As I mentioned before, there are more than 350 of these agreements in force. This is all there is in terms of customs unions. Customs unions is also about trade liberalization, but goes a step further. The countries agree on an external trade policy. So you have this only in the ones you see there. The ones I marked in yellow are, in addition, the groups of countries that are close to, let's say, having created a common market. A common market is again, a step further than building a customs union. Common market is about liberalizing trade, but also capital, also labor. It is about harmonizing rules and so on. So the ones in yellow are the subsets of countries that are even went further than a customs union. Now, the big difference between a customs union and a common market is that a common market is again not regulated, not standardized as a form of cooperation. A customs union is, within the context of WTO. A common market is not, and there again, for the researcher, there is this difficulty of, let's say, gathering data and also, let's say, seeing whether certain case qualifies as a common market or not. There are other databases that you can explore. For example, if you're interested in the environmental or the climate dimension of regional cooperation, there are databases where, you, for example, this one on environmental agreements, where again they start from broader population of treaties, but you can find the regional ones in there. In this one, they distinguish between multilateral, bilateral, and other. And it is in that other category that you will probably find then what we call the regional agreements, regional forms of cooperation in the area of the environment and climate. I will then come to my last question. That is also by way of conclusion. I'm watching the time. So what question? I think that is where we come in as researchers and where you come in as young researchers. I think there is indeed a need to participate in these discussions on regionalism and go beyond the opinion, like I am in favor of or I am against, etc. I think what we should do as academics and as young researchers is to come up with good arguments. Arguments about why do we need more or less regional cooperation? In which areas? What are the challenges that we are facing with respect to climate and the environment, with respect to migration and refugees, with respect to security, with respect to infrastructure? What are the big challenges that national governments are not necessarily able to face, for which it is not necessarily possible to formulate adequate responses at the national level? We have to come up with good arguments based on what is out there. I think what we have to do as researchers is to look for the evidence. Evidence which can be based on case studies. Case studies, sorry. Case studies that show where and how regional cooperation can work to solve concrete problems and make the lives of people better. Case studies, for example, on cross-border cooperation on very specific issues in very specific places. Yeah? But we can also be ambitious and do what we call large N type of analysis, where we gather data on regional cooperation worldwide, and then try to, statistically show the effect of policies on the variables that are of interest. The immediate variables, but also variables in terms of economic growth, poverty reduction, and so on. I think this is our task as research. Now, there is, of course, literature available which partially answers these questions. There is, for example, evidence that intra-regional trade liberalization leads to more trade, and that more trade leads to more economic activity and employment. For example, in the case of ASEAN, it's very clear that trade liberalization within ASEAN has had these effects. This is also the case in other places. Intra-regional trade has contributed to industrialization by stimulating intra-industry trade and so on. So there is evidence, but I think we need more evidence, because as I told you in the beginning, there is a lot of skepticism vis-a-vis regional cooperation and international cooperation in general. You have political discourses that are inward-looking, and I think it is our task indeed to show with evidence that regional cooperation is indeed needed in certain cases. So this should be on our research agenda. We should be careful in designing our research and try to avoid biases, selection biases of all sorts, but I think this is really what we should do, and there is a lot of work to be done. I think there are, for young researchers and PhD researchers, there are many opportunities there to work in this area. I'm looking at the time, and I think I will have to stop here. So this was by way of an introduction to this broad topic of comparative regionalism. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very productive week. So thanks again. I will stop it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Philip de Lombardi, for your lecture. We still have a small amount of time, so I think we can proceed to Q&A session. Is it okay for you, Dr. Philip?
Yes, we can take a few minutes.
Okay, since we have a limited of time, I will only open to 2 questions only from the participant. If you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand button and then proceed to ask your question. First of all, I would like to invite Mr. Iannone from Italy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor De Laban, for the lecture. I want to ask, what's your opinion about what is actually the most problem or weakness that organization can meet For example, if we take the ASEAN have its structure from the Cold War, but now have still some problematic in terms of for example, to no interference rule. So, what is your opinion about the problematic that organization can meet now or in the future? Thank you.
Okay, you wanted to answer it directly, or you want to gather the second question?
No, we can take the other question also.
Okay, the last question will be from Ms. Otesh from Kazakhstan. Ms. Otesh.
Thank you for the speech. My question is that what are the main challenges of regionalism in Central Asia?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Otesh, and also Mr. Iannone for the question. Dr. Philip, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. These are not necessarily easy questions to answer, and I mean they illustrate a bit the moment we are in today. We have let's say the geopolitical dynamics which are there. And which are very much felt also here in Europe, from where I speak. There is a link, of course, between these geopolitical tensions and dynamics and the world of regions. Membership of a regional organization is perhaps more than before interpreted as a form of loyalty towards the other members, and the risk is that, of course, the world is becoming more and more divided in camps, and which leads to this discussion also on, okay, what are regions? Are regions like inward looking primarily, or should they be open and also outward looking? And we have had, I mean, these views changing over time. We have been talking about Fortress Europe, for example, at some point. We have been talking about open regionalism in Asia at some. So, I mean, this is something that changes over time and very much driven by also these political developments. I will not pronounce myself specifically on the issue of non-interference in ASEAN or Central for the moment. I think it's, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's of course the regions and the member states and the citizens of those regions that will have to shape the region institutions. And that is then again driven by national politics, also about, let's say the cost and benefits of doing business regionally. There will be, we will have time during other sessions also then to come back to specific cases. For example, ASEAN, but also then Central Asia or Eurasia, and how they are tied to the geopolitical dynamics. Now, it's not only, I would say, the problems that regional organizations are facing are not only related to geopolitics, and there are other issues which are there, which change the view on regional organizations and which question sometimes the business as usual of these organizations. I can refer to the environment, the environmental impact of trade, for example. So we come from a paradigm where we focused on the economic benefits of free trade. Now we are questioning this on the basis of environmental considerations. There is also the new discourse on strategic autonomy. So also there, this is changing how we look at these agreements, these regional agreements. So there is no clear answer to what is optimal policy. That will also depend from one region to the other. But let's continue the discussion over the course of the week, and we will be able to focus then really also on specific cases and hear people from those regions. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Philip, for your answer, and also to the participant for your questions. This will be our closing for our opening lecture. So thank you very much once again for Dr. Philip for your lecture about regionalism, and also for the participant. Before we continue to our second lecture, we will have a short break. Therefore, I would like to invite the committee to play us some video during break, and I would like to hand over this session to our second moderator, Mr. John. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Introducing the Island of Gods. Visit Bali like you never visited before. New places to hang out, new vibe, new atmosphere. Create a memory in a wonderful night in Bali, where magic waits to happen. Throw a shadow over this island of gods, where endless adventure is waiting to happen. For every young soul, a wonderful experience you can't easily forget.